All right. Hello, everyone. And once again, this is Joe Martin. I'm a senior systems engineer here at Novell. Want to thank you for joining our academic tech talk today. The whole focus here is to talk about how different Novell solutions can actually help you enhance your environments if you're using Google Apps today, or if you aren't yet using it and you're thinking about going into it, some of the advantages that our solutions have. So there's, different ways of looking at this. Joining us today, we've got Matt Schlavine, who's the technology director at Fox Valley Lutheran High School up in Wisconsin. And,
hello, everybody.
Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Joe.
All right. Thank you for joining us here today. We've got Matt, who can kind of speak to some of his personal experiences within his school as far as Google solutions, Novell solutions, things like that. So he'll be able to add some nice real-world things for everyone. A couple of quick notes here. First of all, everyone's line is muted, so if you have a question, please type that into the chat or the questions window. We'll try to answer those as we go along, either in the questions window, or periodically we'll also pause to take some questions that way. The other thing is we are recording this, so if you would like a copy either of the recording or even of just the slides, both of those are definitely going to be available. So please feel free to shoot me an email, jmartin@novell.com, if you'd like either of the slides or the recording, or you'll also be receiving an email from Patrick Hines. When this is all done, you can always reply back to him saying, hey, I'd like a copy of the presentation. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and really talk about a couple of key areas today. We're going to talk first about files, and then we're going to talk about printing, and again, some of the challenges around that and how we're able to help you, even if you are in a Google environment. So if we talk about just kind of how things happen, I mean, I'm sure everyone remembers how things used to be 5 or 10 years ago or further back, where, within IT you had total control of the entire environment. You had servers there. There wasn't any kind of notion of cloud anything. So you had full control of where the files were, where the users were when they were accessing it, typically a lab. Maybe you'd have some computers in the classrooms as well. You had access to printers. Everything else that you set up is what people could use, and you essentially almost acted as sort of a traffic cop, if you will. Now, users didn't always like that, and as time went on, they would start to ask about, hey, is there a way I could get access to some of this information when I'm, at home, or if I'm, maybe going to be on vacation, but I know I still need to work on, some lesson plans or anything. And so what happened over time, since users didn't like the fact that, Mr. IT policeman was telling them what they could do and where they could do it from, they started to look at other ways of getting access to their information. In some cases, they would email files, and that's something that we still see today a lot of. And of course, you have other things like USB drives, even floppy drives at one point. Obviously, you don't really see that too much these days. But a whole host of ways that really bypassed what IT was doing with security restrictions and this and that. And users didn't care, gave them access to things, but there's always security concerns and worry even about the reliability of some of these things. So really, what's happened, though, over time is that some new technologies have come around that really have disrupted things quite a bit. So, most of you, if not all of you that are joining us today, probably are leveraging, Google Apps for education. They definitely were one of the biggest vendors, and still are, to have really disrupted things. Microsoft has to some extent with Office 365, but I've definitely in the academic space seen a ton of Google Apps. And so you've got them coming along, providing a whole host of services. It started off with, Gmail, and then eventually other things like Google Drive came along. Also, you've got all those tablets that people are using, and then you've got internet connections widely available. So all these devices basically say that have made it to where people can use their information anywhere, access it anywhere. And then if they're leveraging Google services at a personal level, it makes it all that much more easier. They say, I could sign up for a Gmail account that's free, and I can use Google Docs and all this stuff. So, at first thought, it sounds like, hey, that's awesome. And when Google moved beyond just the personal space, it expanded this to schools. Hey, some big advantages. But the thing to worry about is that everything's not necessarily all roses when we talk about the cloud. And so, you see some headlines in here of different services, whether we're talking about the various services Google has, Dropbox, even Amazon, Microsoft's had some outages. So all sorts of outages come up. You see the Google one there in the bottom left. This is from last October, not too long ago. I think they had an outage there about 5 or 6 hours of key services, including Gmail and Google Drive. And so that's not to say that you shouldn't use the cloud or that the cloud is horrible, but it means that you at least need to keep it in mind that when you start moving things to the cloud, it doesn't mean it's always going to be available. So you have to start looking at, well, how available are my services when I would run them in-house on my own services, my own servers, I should say. How reliable are those services outside, and can I be down for potentially hours? Can I withstand something like that? Right? And so we say, well, you know what? There is an alternative. So on the one hand, if you haven't adopted the cloud at all, from a file perspective alone, we've got Filer that we're going to talk about. Or if you have adopted the cloud, there's definitely some things that you can do with Filer. So let's talk about what that means, what Filer really is. So first of all, we want to make it a simple concept. So the idea is, whether we talk Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox, any of those kinds of services, think of that being sort of a corporate or enterprise version of it, so that you could take that type of experience from a user level. So, hey, I could use any device, get access to all my information, but now you've got complete control because you're going to leverage your existing environment. So what I've seen in many cases, people that have adopted Google's technologies will say, well, you know what, I don't want to maintain home directories for students or deal with the students at all. And so I've seen some cases where they say, you know what, I'm going to leverage the cloud for students, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, you need to understand some of the caveats when you use the cloud, but that's all well and good. But then for faculty, staff, what do you do? Especially if you've got teachers that have been there for 10 years, 20 years, however long they've been there, they've probably got hundreds, if not thousands of files that are out there. And some, schools will say, well, they should clean it up. They shouldn't have all that. You could say that, but in the end, are they going to clean it up? Probably not. And if you were to tell them all that information is just going to go away, I'm sure they would panic. So you'd say, well, we've got Google Apps available to us. Move all those files up into Google Drive. You could force them to do that as well, but how easily are they going to be able to do that when they have just mass quantities of files? To say nothing about just how difficult it would be, but also all the time that would be needed to potentially move all that, regardless of how fast your internet connection is. When you start looking at how much faculty you have in your environment, think about all the content they have, and if it's gigabytes of data for just one teacher, think about it then how that expands to everyone. So with Filer, you don't worry about any of that. You point at your existing file servers, and it doesn't matter if you're, a Novell environment still, or even if, you've maintained your own infrastructure but have moved to a Microsoft platform. We could very easily point to Windows servers or even NAS appliances that are part of an AD domain. And speaking of AD, from a directory standpoint, we support eDirectory and AD, both, meaning that when I go to leverage Filer and I go to log in, and you'll see how that works a little bit later on, when I go to do that, I'm leveraging those existing credentials. It's not Google authentication or some other weird authentication. It is just my normal standard AD or eDirectory credentials, the same credentials that I would use to log into a PC or a Mac. That's what I leverage for Filer. So all that security that IT has set up with their servers and everything like that, and integrating that with different users and groups and whatnot, all of that's preserved. So it really gives you a lot of advantages there. And then from a user perspective, on the left side, you see a whole host of things there. Mobile devices that typically we're talking about iOS devices, so iPhones, iPads. It could also be Android. Even if you've got some teachers leveraging BlackBerry or even Windows Phone, Surface tablets, they can access their information from any of those devices. Traditional PCs and Macs, we've got a client there. We've got a browser that you could use from any platform, including Chromebooks, to get access, because I know Chromebooks are quite popular these days, again, especially to anyone that's adopted Google Apps. And then anyone that's familiar with WebDAV, we support that. So if you think of Windows, that web folder technology, if you will, we could go ahead and do that too. So from a user perspective, again, it's that same experience, like, what they come to expect from the services that they may be more familiar with, like Google Drive. But from an IT perspective, now you have complete control all over this. And the deployment, you see, this picture of a toaster, it's a simple virtual appliance. So as long as you virtualize in your environment, you see their VMware, Hyper-V, Zen, you're able to deploy this. So easy to deploy, easy to configure through web-based administration, and makes it easy on your users. They don't have to move anything anywhere. So let's really talk about, let's stack up the two things side by side. And again, the point of this chart here, it isn't to say don't use Google Drive, not by any means, but again, it's just to raise awareness on some of the key differences you have between Novell Filer and Google Drive. So as you look in your environment and you maybe struggle with saying, I don't know what to do with my faculty staff yet, students, they are fully on Drive and I'm not changing that. I'm not sure what direction to go for everyone else. This is potentially some guidance. I hate to go over every item. Let's cover some of the big ones. Again, full control over your information. I know that Google has obviously some policies saying that they won't, sell your data and this and that, but at the end of the day, they're giving a lot of services for free to a lot of people. So obviously they need to make money somewhere, and yeah, they're making money on ad revenue with Google search or whatnot, but still just kind of makes you wonder what happens with that data there. But beyond that, what happens if a teacher leaves? Because that does happen, and if you don't have full control over that information, can you guarantee you can pull back files that teachers have shared and things like that? So full control over all your information, leverage everything where it's at, so don't move it anywhere. You've probably got backup and antivirus already in your environment. In fact, I like to highlight one story there. I actually have joined a Google group that's a lot of Wisconsin technology folks are on it. And I saw someone post a question lately or recently asking, how are other schools backing up their Google Drive data? Because remember, that's something that's not there. The data center itself, is redundant. So if Google loses a whole data center, yeah, your data is protected from that standpoint. They'll restore it. But when we start talking about individual people actually deleting files and stuff, you got to go with a third-party paid solution. That is not free. So anyway, someone asked, what are people using? And I saw a school chime in saying that they were paying, I forget what the solution was, but they were paying about $6,000 a year for this third-party solution to back up all their Google Drive data. Well, I went ahead and looked up on the, I think it was the Wisconsin State Board of Education website, how big they were. And they're such a small district that if they were to use Filer, Filer would probably be, I don't know, $1,300 versus $6,000. So they could very easily save a ton of money. They could save nearly $5,000 a year using Filer. And if you think about it, more than likely they still have servers. So they probably still have backup. So it's not like they would have to buy more backup hardware, more backup software, all this other stuff. Leverage what they already have. Just add Filer for minimal cost instead of saying, well, we're going to use the Google technologies and pay a lot more money for some of them to back it up for us. So, for a very small district, potential huge savings. So I can't imagine what a large district could save in just that piece alone, the backup antivirus. It helps with deleted stuff. You can see the platform support. Obviously, Google's big on supporting their own platforms, so Androids and Chromebooks. There is support for iOS now, but when you talk about some of the other platforms, it's not there. And then the other thing that's interesting is that we've got technology that allows you to view hundreds of different types of files. So if I'm on my iPad, I don't have to have apps for all these different files just to view them. There's around, I'm going to say 600 to 700. I just put hundreds in there because that's constantly changing that I can view. If I'm trying to do the same thing leveraging Google Drive, there's about 30 file types. So again, depending upon what you're doing, that could be very advantageous. I mean, if you're mainly dealing with, Doc, XLS, and PowerPoint and PDF, and that's it, well, you'll be covered. But, in the teaching process, teachers tend to use so many different kinds of applications that save files in so many different formats. they need to make sure they can still consume that information when they're using their different devices. Filer, they could do that. They can't do that necessarily with Drive. And then we've got other stuff. So when we share it, I mean, as a user, when I share files, IT can first of all control what I can share. And then if I've already shared it, IT can see that, can manage it, could actually say, oops, you shouldn't have done that. We're going to kill that. So there's a lot of control around sharing that just flat out isn't there with Google Drive. So those are some of the big ones. You can see, quite a few things in there. But I always like to bring that up and really illustrate those things. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second. So, Matt, just to ask you, in your district, because I know you use Filer, do you have some users also leveraging Google Drive?
Yes, we do. We have students that are using Google Drive, and we also have them we give them the option for Filer, and we find out that a lot of times it's not a either or, it's a both. If they're working on a document in Google Docs, they can pop it right up the Drive, that's no problem. But if they're working on an assignment for a class, for example, a photography class, they're taking photographs at home, they got to get those photographs from home to school so that the teacher can grade them. Well, going through Google Drive is certainly a possibility, but it's just very handy with Filer to just drop them onto their network share. The teacher can easily find them off the network share without having to navigate through web pages, and it's just really handy to do it for that particular thing. So we're finding it's not either or. I think you should have. We're using both of them.
And would you say then, and because it's
one other thing, Joe, I'd like to.
Sorry, go ahead, Matt, and then I've got a question for you.
Sure, we got a little lag here, I think. One other thing I'd like to mention is you had said that the Filer appliance, you just drop it in. I think that's very important to note that not only does the Filer appliance just drop into place, from an IT perspective, I am just thrilled that it doesn't touch any of my file system in any way. So I don't have to go to the servers that Filer is servicing and change file system rights or modify directory rights or install an agent on that server. It does not touch them at all, zero. So that's something real handy from an IT perspective, that if you did want to give Filer a whirl, there is no modification to your existing system whatsoever.
No, that's a great point. So I often don't highlight that, and that is a really important thing to highlight. So thank you for bringing that up. And then I just want to, excuse me, ask you a question. Going back to the first thing that you were talking about, where you've got users really using both. What sort of adoption did you see with Filer? Was it one of those things that people were scared of? Did they seem to kind of dive into it head first? How do you see people having really adopted Filer in your environment?
I think it's on a kind of a need basis. The teachers that are doing, like for example, the photography teacher, the technology teacher, some of the English teachers that have their students writing lots of papers, they really dove into it big. Some of the other teachers, like a math teacher, where you may not have so much back and forth going on, they don't seem to have adopted it as much. We're seeing a lot of use coming from the departments in school, like our communication department. The lady who works up there, if I get off the line for a minute to apply a patch or something, I get an email, Filer's down, because she's using it just constantly to work at home in Photoshop, move files back and forth. So some people have really jumped in big with it.
Cool. Well, thanks. Yeah, and I'm glad that you hear that's how it is, and I've heard that from other schools too. And I think it's important to bring that up because a lot of times when school districts will adopt Google Apps, of course, the first thing is, well, it's free, which even though it really isn't, like we talked about backup Google Drive, but let's move beyond that. Then the next thing is, well, they all know Google. Is what we'll hear, because obviously so many people have their personal Gmail accounts and things like that. And so, this story that you've got of people adopting Filer very quickly in your district, I've heard that time and time again. We'll see later on, I've got a couple of slides about some references from what schools have done. And one of them is a school district that actually moved away from Google Apps to all 100% on-premise solutions, and one of the things they talked about there, how quickly Filer was adopted. Another story that I'll share is with a school up in Wisconsin. I asked them not too long ago if they could just give some use cases because I wanted to hear how some of their teachers maybe are using it, and it's open to students too. But I was curious, really curious about the teachers. And one of them, he teaches a couple of classes. He's also the coach of 3 different sports. And one of the things he said, he flat out said, without Filer, he would not have been able to keep his head above water this school year. And so he says that he's used it not just in the classroom for teaching, but even when he's coaching his different teams, he's out on the field. He'll have his iPad and he can go ahead and show game plans and things like that to them and leverage that. And again, people could say, well, you can use Drive for that, and that's true, and everyone in that district is very familiar with Google Drive and the rest of the Google applications. So to me, that kind of speaks volume about the ease of use of Filer, that this person said if it weren't for Filer, he couldn't keep his head above water, not if it weren't for Drive, because again, all services are available to everyone in that particular district. So we hear those stories all a lot. So thank you very much, Matt, for sharing what you guys have seen there. So that's well and good. I could get to my files. We've talked about the advantages there. So then the next key thing is, well, how do I print this? So let's talk about that, and then I'm going to actually demonstrate some of this stuff. So actually you'll get to see this live with my iPad here in a moment. But let's talk about how we move into the printing space, because after all, printing has been around for years, and it's something that, it's not new to anyone, most definitely not new to us. I mean, after all, we've done file and printer sharing, for well over 30 years with some of the very early versions of NetWare. So we know how to do it, and that's the one thing. If you look at which vendor are you going to try to rely on to do printing, Google obviously has Google Cloud Print available, and that's been available for a couple of years, versus someone who's got a little more experience with it. But regardless, we understand all the things you have to worry about, different types of printers, all the security that you have to worry about, things like that. And we also understand that mobile printing is huge. I mean, and that's why there are solutions like Google Cloud Print and AirPrint on the Apple side, and so many different types of mobile printing technologies. Because again, everybody's bringing these devices. They say they want to print, and the last thing IT wants to do, though, is to go and just buy new printers. I mean, obviously, school districts and higher ed institutions as well are all getting pinched when it comes to budgets, especially anyone that is a public school or public university. See a lot of reduced funding from states and whatnot. And so you can't just go around and say, well, we'll just buy all new printers that have AirPrint and Google Cloud Print capabilities in it. It's not an option. So you need to have a solution that allows you to use all those existing printers that you have in the environment, but be able to print to them without making changes to that infrastructure, hopefully. At least that's the desire in most cases. And it must be easy for the users. So just like, Matt was talking about the adoption of Filer there, in order for that to ever happen anywhere, Filer must be easy to use. We need the same thing for a mobile printing solution. Because after all, mobile printing is not taking your iPad and putting it on a copier and hit copy, right? You need something to allow you to go ahead and print just directly, from your device, whatever it might be. So again, it's something we can help with Novell iPrint. So any of you that might be new to Novell that joined us today, the printing has gone under different names over the years, but we've had printing in one way or another for many, many years now in NetWare, later on in our Linux-based platform, Open Enterprise Server. Now it's available as this standalone appliance, just like you saw in the diagram earlier, or the slide earlier for Filer. So once again, virtual appliance supports the different virtualization solutions. Now on the right side, what's a little different is, in the Filer slide, we pointed at your different file servers. Well, we're talking about printing, so we're talking about the printing resources that are out there. We don't care what it is. We're vendor agnostic, so you can print, to HP printers, Xerox printers, Lexmark, it could be Canon, multifunction devices. We don't care. So use any printer that you've got out there, a multifunction device. From a security standpoint, let's leverage once again your existing directory you have there, whether it be eDirectory or Active Directory. And then from a user perspective, a whole host of devices. So mobile devices, I list on here, or I usually say rather, Android, iOS, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, but because in the upper right corner we have that note about email, we can actually do email-based printing. So essentially any device that can send an email, like a Chromebook, is able to print. So a mobile device could truly be any kind of device. And then, of course, we've got traditional clients for PC, Mac, even for Linux, if any of you are running Linux desktops. So we really have this combined desktop and mobile printing solution, and it doesn't matter, once again, if you're a Novell environment or Microsoft environment, and I can't stress that enough. I've actually got a school district I'm working with right now in Wisconsin that moved away from us, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, and they're evaluating iPrint solely for desktop printing in their case because they've had a number of issues with trying to deploy printers using just the facilities that are built into AD if you're using regular Windows print servers. And so now they're interested in iPrint to see if that'll help them. But one of the other selling points, I mean, that is their primary concern, but they also are getting demand to print from, in their case, I believe is iPads and Chromebooks are the other platforms besides your traditional desktop platforms. And so the fact that iPrint can handle all of those is something that's very attractive to them and has been attractive to many folks. I'm going to pause for a second. Matt, I see a flashing light. Do we have a question?
Yeah, we do. Matthew Leamy is asking, does iPrint support cloud print on Chromebooks?
So this is what I'm going to say about Google Cloud Print. In fact, that's a good segue. I'm going to move it to this next slide. So usually I'm talking about iPrint versus Google Cloud Print, but at the end of the day, if you have Chromebooks in the environment and you don't want to deal with email-based printing, this is a question that comes up quite frequently. So when we talk about complementing your Google infrastructure, this is an example where iPrint can actually do that. We have a Novell Cool solution that's out there, and if anybody wants it, I can get you the link. In fact, I probably should have included on one of the slides here that actually goes into the steps on how to set up Google Cloud Print, so basically leveraging a Windows machine there and leveraging your iPrint printers. So at that point, when someone goes in and takes a look at the printers that have been made available by the Google Apps Administrator on a Chromebook, those printers in essence are iPrint printers. It's something, because I'll be upfront, because it's a cool solution, that means it's not officially supported. We're looking at officially getting that baked into the iPrint appliance in a future version, but there is that option today. And so anybody that, again, wants information on that, shoot me an email, jmartin@novell.com, and I'll gladly get you the link to that cool solution article. So that's an excellent question. Matt, do we have any other questions?
Not at this time.
Not right now? Okay. So hopefully that doesn't mean I'm putting everyone to sleep. So let's talk about, again, iPrint, and I'm going to say versus Google Cloud Print because, again, I like to bring that up, especially for anyone that's got more than just Chromebooks in the environment. So I think that's probably one of the biggest areas where iPrint can come in and help you, even if you're a Google Apps shop and you've got some Chromebooks. It could be a lot of Chromebooks, but at the end of the day, if you also have iPads, if you've got PCs, if you've got Macs, if you have all these different types of devices in addition to Chromebooks, then let's talk about how you can leverage iPrint as really, a single solution and potentially support all of those devices. So again, I make a note about control over your own data. So people may wonder, well, why is that even in here? Well, what you have to realize is every time you print something leveraging Google Cloud Print, that print job goes through your internet connection, so first of all chewing up precious internet bandwidth, to Google, gets processed by Google, then gets shipped back down, once again chewing up more internet bandwidth, to your environment, and then goes on to your printers. So the fact that it still has to get into Google's cloud, be processed by them, again brings up really the same questions about if you just move traditional files up there like into Google Drive. So if you were to do iPrint completely, then you would be able to keep all of that local, all that information local, so you don't necessarily have to use Google Cloud Print. But regardless, full support for all these platforms, and I really say full support for this reason. Obviously, Google's got full support for Android and Chromebook with Google Cloud Print, but once you start talking, let's say like iOS as an example. If I install Chrome on my iPad, I can print out of Chrome using Google Cloud Print, but I can't just necessarily print out of any old app, unless an app maybe happened to have added Google Cloud Print capabilities, but really there isn't true platform support. Google hasn't released a Google Cloud Print app, so to speak, for iOS. There are third-party apps you can use to get this capability. They're not free, So there is that additional charge there if you want to do that. With iPrint, we've got an app available for iOS and BlackBerry and Windows Phone, so it makes it very easy to share files with the iPrint app to be able to print and get a kind of print dialog that's very easy to use. But we also, on iOS in particular, support AirPrint. So we could support the native capability that Apple has put in there without introducing any extra client software or anything like that. So that's where it's really important to note on all these platforms, whether they're talking mobile platforms or desktop platforms, complete support for those platforms versus having just minimal support essentially from Chrome unless you're running something, running a device that's on a Google platform. So big thing there. And again, the internet piece, I already touched on that. Free up your bandwidth, and of course if there's an internet outage, that doesn't mean suddenly you can't print. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight is that very last one about authentication. So I know that there are different solutions. Google's got one, and there's NetIQ Identity Manager that can do it as well, that will actually take your existing directory, so that could be eDirectory or Active Directory, and then it will actually go ahead and sync all that. So I know a lot of people do that, sync all that into Google Apps, and that's how they do their provisioning. They don't provision, accounts manually, and that's great, but still, at the end of the day, if I'm going to leverage Google Cloud Print, I am doing Google authentication. So if all of a sudden one day I'm having an issue or something, am I going to be able to troubleshoot that? Probably not. I'm going to post a message on some Google forum because it's not like I can probably call them up or anything, and then hope that someone responds. And we know how that goes whenever there's any kind of outage in any Google service versus iPrint leveraging all that stuff natively. So if you can't authenticate to the iPrint app, that means your AD is not, your Active Directory is not working properly, or your eDirectory is not working properly. So I bring that distinction because at the end of the day, people might think, well, it's the same credentials at the end of the day for Google Cloud Print because I'm syncing my users. Yes, but I'm still leveraging a different actual authentication mechanism at that point. So those are some of the key things to kind of keep in mind on iPrint versus Google Cloud Print. Doesn't mean you should never use Google Cloud Print, just like it does, what I said earlier about files doesn't mean you should never use Google Drive, but it's more information just to be aware of. So as you start looking at, what do I want to have everybody using, there's reasons to actually leverage, again, some of these on-premise things in addition to Google Cloud Print. With that, Matt, question for you then, are you guys using, I know you use iPrint for printing from desktops, are you using that to print from mobile devices in your school today?
We were running the iPrint off of the OES servers for years and years, and we decided to try the iPrint appliance, and like we mentioned before, it's something you can plug in parallel next to your existing system. You don't have to rip everything out. And we ran them side by side for a while, and our goal was just to use the appliance to do the mobile printing and leave the desktop printing on the OES server. But after we ran that appliance for probably a quarter of the school year, we said, why are we running two systems? So we moved all of our desktop printing over to the appliance as well. Currently, we're using the mobile printing for teachers only, but there are plans as we roll out a one-to-one device policy for our students that we would, of course, then have to give them some way to print, and we would include them in the mobile printing as well. So for now, it's teachers only, but we do plan on rolling it out to students as well.
Cool, cool. Good to hear it. I'll also just ask you real quick, too, any questions, by the way, have there been anything that come into the chat window there?
Nothing on other than the Chrome.
Okay. Okay. So again, anyone, if you've got questions as we go through, please go ahead and put your questions into the chat window there, or any just stories to tell. Here we've got a dirty limerick. No, we can't do those on the webcast. But anyways, any questions or comments, please put those in there and we'll touch on those. But with that, I think it's demo time here. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of this stuff in action. So give me just a moment, and I'm going to share my iPad onto my screen here. There we go. All right, cool. So let's go into my Novell folder. I've got all these different, Novell-related apps, and let's go ahead and go into Filer. Now you see it didn't ask me to log in, I just told it to save my password, so you could choose as administrator to allow that or not. But it is leveraging, in this case, eDirectory credentials. I'm an eDirectory user for this demo. I've actually got this pointed at Active Directory as well, so I've got users from both sides in there. But anyways, when you log into Filer, for those of you that are new to Filer, maybe haven't seen Filer before or aren't very familiar, there's several areas there. One of the big ones there is the My Files area. So essentially, that's my home directory, and that to me is one of the biggest reasons to leverage Filer, even if you are a Google Apps shop. Because again, what I spoke of earlier, that I'm a teacher, I've been in the district for 20 years, I've got all these files that I've used, and some of them I continue to use. Some cases I maybe don't edit them, I don't modify them, but I go back and refer to them, so I still need to access them. Do I want to have to upload all of that by hand into Google Drive? Not really. So now, because my friendly administrator decided to put in Filer, I could just pull up this app, I could click on My Files, and now I could go ahead and browse all that information. So let's go to this projects folder, and I've got then folders here named after different hot sauces, because I absolutely love hot sauce. My wife thinks I'm going to burn a hole in my stomach someday, but I'll worry about that when it happens. Anyway, so when I go into my hot sauce folder, my Tabasco folder, see I got a couple of files in there. And so one I'll just show off this hot image. It's actually a habanero pepper that I chopped up one time to put into a pot of chili. So notice it came up really fast, even though I am actually tethered to my cell phone for this webinar today. The reason it came up fast, if you can see this little icon overlay here, it's like an arrow pointing down and inside of a circle. That indicates I've actually downloaded this for offline access. So I could go through and mark any of these files for offline access, so that way even if I'm in an area without an internet connection, I could still go ahead and access that file. So it shows it very quickly. We'll sync that in the background, by the way, so if someone were to update it on the back end, it's my home directory, so that someone would have to be me, but even if this were a network share, if someone updated this or modified it in the back end, I would see that within a few moments. But one of the big things that I like, well, there's two really big things to highlight here. Let me actually show sharing, because I think sharing then leads us into the second big thing, if you will. So you can see I've shared this with a number of folks. So let me go ahead and go into the sharing button here where I can edit all this information. So you can see here a list of people. So I've got internal users. Those are all the ones there with the grayed out silhouettes, if you will. The one on the top with the envelope, that's an external user. So I just shared it, I think, with my Yahoo account, because I've got a Gmail and a Yahoo, all these different accounts. So all I had to do to share it externally is type in a person's email address. So if I'm a teacher, that could very well be the email address of the parents of one of the students that I need to share something with the parents. And so that's there at the very bottom, file link. I've actually created just a generic link here because Filer has that capability. So if I don't want someone on the outside to have to log in and go through that hassle, I can just email them a link. They click the link, they download the file. Make it very easy. All this assumes that the administrator allows me to do this. The administrator determines, can I share internally? Can I do it externally? Can I do it with file links? All this stuff isn't on by default. So initially there's no sharing on. We keep the system fairly secure. The administrator can go turn those capabilities on. So again, when we talk about all the control we give versus the control that's there in Google Drive, we get pretty granular on the control here over sharing and being able to pull that stuff back. But anyways, you can see here, let me tap on an internal person. Notice I have some additional options here. So I can then choose what sort of access this person has. So I could actually say they can only view it or they can edit it. The other thing that's really important is an expiration. So if I want to share this with all the students in my class, this document, like let's say I'm an art teacher and I say, hey, you know what, because I love spicy food, when I see a spicy pepper, that inspires me. I want to share this with you so you can think about what inspires you. That's an example. I could go ahead and do that, but not just leave it out there forever, because maybe it's just for a project that everyone's working on for the next 2 weeks. So I could say, let's just go ahead and make this thing expire after 14 days. For example, or make it expire on a specific date. Maybe I want to have this be out there until the end of the semester, and then I could go and do that. So I actually tapped away, didn't mean to do that. So let me get back into my file there. Sorry about that, guys. It happens. So anyways, so I got a lot of options there. On an internal person, you can see those choices are there. The other things I wanted to illustrate, I can also even choose if that recipient can go in internal share this with someone else. So in this case, I've shared this with Lothar, and I said, Lothar, you can share this as well with other internal people. You can't reshare it with anyone else, but at least with internal people. So you have that control there. On an external user, I don't have all of those options. It's basically what type of access, view or edit, and do we do at expiration, and that's it. If this were a folder, there would be one additional level of permission, something we call contributor, which basically says I'm even giving you permissions to add new files to that folder. But as an external user, we don't allow them to reshare just because things could get out of hand in a hurry if we were to allow that. All right, so let me go ahead and get out of the sharing. The other thing that I want to highlight, the real second part here that shows how this is a real collaboration solution, are these comments. So it's one thing for me to share files with people, but if let's say I'm sharing this with all the students in my class and they're going to be working on this project and collaborate, if they had to in turn email each other in order to actually ask questions and just to communicate, and they would always have to say, okay, I made some changes, now go log into Filer to look at what I did. You know, it wouldn't be very intuitive, would make it maybe a little difficult to use. So that's why we've added this commenting capability here in Filer. That way, if I do share with all the students this file, right within the Filer interface, they could go ahead and then make comments, and you can see it's threaded because you can reply to comments and all this stuff. So we can really go ahead and make this a true collaborative platform. So the kinds of things that people talk about they love with Google Apps, and usually you're really talking about Google Drive, maybe combining it with Google Docs a little bit. Now I can go ahead and do that on here very, very easily, right? And so I don't have to worry about going in and telling people do some stuff in email, some stuff in Filer. So it reminds me of actually a school that I met with recently that is going to be adopting Google Apps. And one of the hurdles they've really had has been around doing some of this file stuff actually on iPads, interestingly enough. Even though Google's got some apps available for it, they said that some of that stuff still isn't working all that great. And so I was, showing them Filer and said, hey, let's take a look at it, at least consider it. So very easy to do all of that. I'm going to go back to the home screen. So that's the My Files. Again, that I think is one of the biggest, most important areas to do that on. The other areas, though, that why Filer is important are those net folders, those network shares, because that's the other one where you probably aren't going to even leverage Drive, because if you think about it, Google Drive, just like OneDrive's, oh boy, so apparently I set my status that I am busy. Someone sent me an instant message, so let's go ahead and sign out of there. My apologies, everyone. So, when you think about Google Drive or like OneDrive in Microsoft environment, what is it meant for? It's really your own personal stuff. Well, what about, when you think about it, you log in on a PC and you have all these drive letters that get mapped. So there's all these network shares or volumes, whatever you want to call them, that are out there. I can't really take those shares and upload it to my Google Drive. Those aren't really my files. I mean, I guess I could, but that's going to really make it difficult if those are the files for the whole department. How is the whole department going to work if it's my Google Drive? So that's the other real important area. I mean, I think that the easy one to adopt this for is the personal stuff so that people don't have to move all of it. But now all those shares that are out there, I want that same kind of experience with it on a mobile platform, accessing it from anywhere. Filer lets me do that, and I can go to net folders and see the different folders that are out there. And now I could go and do all that same stuff, share, I could comment, all that other stuff. So that's another real important thing, and something that is going to be really difficult to do potentially with Google Drive. And there's some other stuff. I could view files that people have shared with me. I could view, different files I've marked for offline access. So when I go out there, I could see I've actually got this in a couple different folders. So both of them I've marked for offline access. I could even go in and easily search for files. So again, we make it very easy to get to all of this information, right? And so that's why we say, even if you're Google Apps Shop, unless you've gone full Google, and I do know some districts have done this where they said, we no longer have file servers, we no longer have any servers at all. Everything is 100% cloud-based. If it's 100% cloud-based, I'm probably not going to be able to help you, but if you do have servers, and that server has content on it, Now adding Filer into the mix can definitely help, and like Matt said, he's got personal experience there with folks in his school leveraging both Drive and Filer, so it's definitely not an either or. Now, one thing to highlight again, I like to pull this up. It's a Homer Simpson resignation letter. In fact, I'll mark that for offline access. Let's do that. So that's easily done. Let's say I wanted to print this. Let's say I'm Homer Simpson. I've typed up this letter because I can't take it anymore, and I want to go ahead and print this. Done very easily. Open in Novell iPrint, because again, full support for iOS. We've got that native app available. So when this comes up, I could choose a printer. I'm actually hitting an appliance that's in our Provo, Utah location right now. So you can see there's 3 printers listed on there. But you know what? I want to show you there's a whole lot more than just that. So this single appliance is hosting a lot of printers. The reason I like to show that is this, is if you think about it, on a PC, or a Mac or whatever, your traditional kind of desktop environment, you usually don't have users installing all the printers in the district or in the university. So you may have hundreds of printers, but a typical user probably only has 3 or 4 printers installed because that's all they normally print to. Well, we bring that same concept to a mobile device. We're never installing printers, so how do I kind of flag those? I call them favorite printers. So those 3 or 4 printers that I print to most often are my favorite printers, and that's why those are the ones that show up initially in iPrint, in the iPrint app. But of course, like you saw a second ago, I could go in and pick any of those additional printers if I wanted to. The other thing, you see the scan using QR code. As an administrator, you could actually generate QR codes for all of your printers. So I could actually walk up to a printer, if I had one right here, right now, take my iPad, let the camera scan that QR code, and all of a sudden the iPrint app would list that printer in here. So I don't even have to go and try to find it in a list, if let's say it's a real long list. But anyway, so let's just pick one. I'm going to pick one of the printers that's in Provo. And then you can see here a nice dialog box that really should be easy to use, because if you think about it, what does a user see if they hit print on a PC, on a Mac, out of the Chrome browser on a Chromebook? Similar kind of options, right? Color or black and white, do you want it double-sided, how many copies, and so on and so forth. So we give the same kind of experience that users are used to. Anyone that's printed a document on pretty much any platform ever, they see that type of, dialogue. And again, remember, in the background, this thing is leveraging eDirectory or Active Directory. I didn't get prompted to log in because, again, I've saved my password. If I didn't save my password, I actually would have to type it in. And it's doing true AD authentication or true eDirectory authentication. This is not Google authentication. So it's leveraging all that infrastructure you've got right now to do that. So very easily I could go ahead and do that. So that means you get your accounting capabilities, auditing capabilities, stuff like that. And at this point, all I would need to do is hit print, except I don't want to freak out people in our executive briefing center in Provo wondering why Homer Simpson just printed his resignation letter, so we won't actually send it. I could also very easily do AirPrint if I had some AirPrint printers available. I do not right now. So very easy to print. You can see there Filer and iPrint, and of course I could take any app and really print a document this way. So it shows though how I can go ahead and leverage all of this infrastructure, even though I could be a Google Apps environment as well. I'll pause for a second before I pick up the presentations. Matt, have we had any additional questions?
No, we have not. I think we're in the after lunch snooze time, Joe.
Yeah, I think that might be what it is. That's quite all right, though. So let's go ahead and just talk about, to close things out here, a couple of stories here. So this one right here, Mukwanago School District, they're in Wisconsin. I've worked with them personally. This is the story I shared with you earlier about that gentleman who's teaching a couple classes, and he's also coaching 3 different sports, and he loves Filer. So the real interesting thing was, in 2012, they moved away from us completely because, we had just been acquired by the Attachment Group a year earlier, and there were questions about the future Novell, and they knew they had some older Novell technologies there anyway. So rather than upgrade them, they said, you know what, we're going to try something. So they leveraged some open source technologies, had a bunch of problems. 2013 fully moved back to us, but during that entire time, they're also a Google Apps environment. Now, the interesting thing about them, the one piece of Google Apps they do not have turned on is Gmail, because they previously had GroupWise for everybody. They went to Zimbra for everybody. They're back on GroupWise now. But Gmail's the only piece that's turned off. Otherwise, Google Docs is there and Google Drive and stuff. And so kind of like what Matt said in his environment, that just both solutions are available. The way that I've actually heard their IT director say it is those are, Filer and Google Drive are both just different tools in the toolbox available to the teachers. So, some schools will say, we want to standardize on just one thing. We don't want to have to support multiple things. But at the end of the day, someone is probably going to find some solution they like. Like they'll say, you know what, I know Google Drive is here. I'm actually a Dropbox fan. Let me just install that. Right? So at the end of the day, it's going to be very difficult to say only one solution out there. So you give them choice, let them use whatever's easiest for them. And so that's what Quantico's done. They came back, implemented a whole bunch of things, including Filer, mobile iPrint, our mobile management solution as well, ZenWorks mobile management, so a whole bunch of things. And so they definitely really liked all that stuff. The other one I wanted to highlight, this is the school that I mentioned, moved away from Google Apps. So what happened is new IT administration comes in, the IT director comes in here along with other IT staff, and they say, you know what, we know this district's already using Google. We have some legitimate concerns about security and lack of control over sharing and what happens when a teacher leaves. And so they decided to go fully on-prem. Now, they leveraged a combination of Microsoft and Novell technologies when they did it, because unfortunately at the time when they initially did this migration, they weren't aware of all the offerings we had. So they put in Windows Server and Exchange and AD. But one of the key things they didn't have, even in the Microsoft area, was a replacement for Google Drive. So any of you that have joined today that have Google Apps in your otherwise maybe a Microsoft environment for the most part, you probably already realize that Microsoft doesn't have a Google Drive-like thing. They're trying to get there, and they're starting to add some more capabilities to OneDrive as part of Office 365, but if you're doing stuff on-prem, it's a little bit more difficult, and especially if you're trying to support devices outside of, let's say, Surface Pro tablets or Windows desktops and Windows laptops. So, long story short, they put in Filer, love it, and again found quick user adoption, just like what Matt was talking about. And so they've actually got schools that they're in Canada, in Calgary, Canada. They are having other schools in their area actually contacting them because they're finding other schools have some of the similar concerns. They're wanting to know, hey, how did you guys do this and move away from Google? So it really shows too, by the way, that not necessarily everyone is quote unquote using Google, although I know that's a lot of times a popular notion. So kind of bring it all home. What does all of this mean? And actually, let me pause. Matt, any questions?
Yeah, we just had one. This is from David. How does Filer Restore work with Google Drive since those files are stored in the cloud?
Sure. So in this case, when we're talking about Filer kind of complementing the Google infrastructure, what we're really saying is Filer is going to give you access to the files in your network environment, and it isn't something that's going to point to Google. So in other words, if someone wants to use Google Drive, they can. They're using Google's interfaces for that. If they want to use Filer, they can do that. So at that point, whatever backup and restore process you already have in place for your existing files, that would hold true of people accessing those files through Filer. But we would not otherwise touch Google Drive. Google Drive would be on its own, and so there it's by, third-party backup solutions that cost $6,000 a year or whatever that crazy stuff is, to completely separately back up and restore Google Drive stuff. So hopefully that maybe clears it up. Because I may have muddied it a little bit earlier, and I definitely don't want to give the impression that Filer gives you access to the files in Google Drive. That's not the case. It's meant to give you Google Drive-like access, so that kind of interface and experience to the files on your existing infrastructure. All right. Any other questions, Matt?
No, not at this time.
Okay. So what does this all mean? Again, support, first of all, latest technologies. So sometimes there's a notion that, oh, Novell's old hat and doesn't support, latest, greatest, this and that. Definitely not true. So just like, the cloud may seem cutting edge, but when we talk about the latest technologies available, to run in your districts, those are all supported by us. The latest versions of SUSE Linux, our OES platform that runs on top of that, latest versions of Windows Desktop, Windows Server, support Office 2013. We can support those Chromebooks as we've talked about here. Latest versions of Android and iOS are all supported. So if you want to use newer technology, that doesn't mean, that I can't use Novell products. That's not true at all. As you see here, we talk about keeping your data on-premise. Again, if you want to have some in the cloud, I'm not saying don't do it, but just, again, keep everything in mind, the outages, things like that we talked about. But there's a whole lot of other things like do the upgrades when you want. So Matt gave the example earlier that sometimes he'll patch his filer environment, and the thing is he chooses when to do that. Whereas when you're using Google Apps, sure, I could go in and say I'm going to turn Labs features off and stuff like that, but eventually once Google wants to roll a certain feature out to everyone, there comes a point where you just don't have a choice. You get it. So with us, you decide when to do it, go at your own schedule. And of course, we don't have to worry about harvesting of the data or anything like that because it's not in the cloud, and you get to give your users choice now. I could say, as a teacher, maybe I'll put some files up in the cloud. If it's an IEP, since that's sensitive information, I will not store that in Google Drive. Maybe that's the district's policy even. But I could go ahead and choose which files maybe I do want in there and know that the bulk of my files are still right here on the local environment. And so then why Novell in particular? Because those are reasons to think about, maybe why to keep some stuff on premise or whatever. But again, no disruptions to migration, so I don't have to go in and force everyone and say, okay, in 3 months we are going to shut down our file servers. It is up to you to move all your files into Google Drive if you want to keep any of it. Don't do that. Keep running it. Leverage your infrastructure. You've already spent plenty of money on it, assuming that it's not 10-year-old infrastructure, and it'll likely keep running for plenty of time here. Leverage all that. Give your users choice. They can move some individual files, but not an ugly migration to move everything there. And easily add file and iPad to your environments. Matt talked about that, the easy deployment through this software or virtual appliance model to get all these full capabilities. And now full support for more than just Google platforms, because again, Google's big on supporting obviously Android and Chromebooks, but when we start looking at other platforms, the support's minimal. Usually for any other platform, it's install the Chrome browser if you want some kind of support. And so we're able to go ahead and give your users choice on platforms, especially if you're BYOD. That's very important. And if you need to manage all these different devices, add ZenWorks into your environment. If any of you are not familiar with ZenWorks, great solution for managing desktops, laptops, mobile devices, all sorts of things. And I know we have some tech talks on that coming up soon. And then lastly, I will say, look at who's got the years of experience with this stuff. So again, we know and understand what it means to manage files, to manage printers, to do all of this stuff. And that's not to say that Google doesn't or other providers don't. But again, it's something we've been doing for a long time, so we definitely have plenty of years of expertise. Last thing I wanted to highlight are the upcoming Tech Talks we have. So you definitely want to thank you guys for joining today. If you want information on other topics, first of all, we have a couple more academic webinars coming up. There's one towards the end of next month, another one towards the end of March. And besides ones that are maybe geared towards academic environments, we've got ones on just a whole host of products. So you can see there are File Management Suite, ZenWorks, as I mentioned, things like that. So a lot of information there. We've also got our sister company, Attachmate, with some of their products kind of, related to mainframes and things like that. The complete schedule is always available at novell.com/tech talks. So with that, I'll pause one last time. Matt, any more questions?
No, I think they've questioned out.
All right. Well, with that being said, thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Joe. It was a pleasure to be here, and thank you to everybody for attending.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.